evening and welcome back. I am Ken McCall, the Jazz Vinyl Audiophile, and today we're going to discuss, you're going to listen, hopefully, the extremely large offering on April 20th for Record Store Day. I've gone through all the jazz releases and I've listened to most of them as a member of the journalism industry, whatever it is they call what we do. They've sent me a lot of the stuff so I can hear what the music sounds like, what the audio quality is, who did the remastering work, who cut the lacquers. So I'll talk to you about all of those things over the next 2 or 3 videos. This will be a series because there is so much to talk about. And I don't want to produce a 3-hour video. I don't want to reproduce a 45-minute video. But anyway, let's go over the titles that are upcoming on April 20th on vinyl from Record Store Day. Sun Ra at the Showcase, live in Chicago, 1976-1977. 2 LP set on Jazz Detective, Zev Feldman's label. Zev Feldman is everywhere on this Record Store Day. He often is everywhere, but this time even more so than usual. But let me just run through these. Art Tatum, Jewels in the Treasure Box, the 1953 Chicago Blue Note Jazz Club recordings on Resonance. Mal Waldron and Steve Lacy, The Mighty Warrior, live in Antwerp on Elemental, 2 LP set. Sonny Rollins, Freedom Weaver, the 1959 European Tour recordings, 4 LPs on Resonance. Chet Baker, Jack Sheldon, and Perfect Harmony. Now there's an unusual lineup. The Lost Album, The Lost Jazz Detective. Yusef Lateef, Atlantis Lullaby, the concert from Avignon on Elemental, 2 LPs. Then 2 Cannonball Adderley records that are really starkly different. Burnin' in Bordeaux, live in France in 1969, 2 LP set on Elemental. Then Poppin' in Paris, live at Olympia in 1972, Elemental, 2 LP set. And then Brother Jack McDuff, Ain't No Sunshine on Corey Weed's Reel to Reel label, 2 LP set. Another one from Corey, Shelly Man Jazz from the Pacific Northwest, Reel to Reel, 2 LP set. A Left Turn, Sister Rosetta Tharpe, live in France, a 1966 concert in Limoges, somewhere in France, I don't know. And then Sun Ra, Pink Elephants on Parade on the Modern Harmonic label, which I think is an offshoot of Sundays. They do all sorts of work. A mono reissue of Bill Evans, Everybody Digs Bill Evans, Craft Recordings. The reissue of Bebel Gilberto's 2014 record, Tudo Music, Bebel, the daughter of Astrid. Then a reissue of Astrid Gilberto's That Girl from Ipanema on Friday Music. Howlin' Wolf, live in Europe, Bremen 1964 on the Southern Echoes label that I'd never heard of before. Charlie Parker, Norman Grant's Jazz at the Philharmonic, 3,500 LPs. Charles Mingus Reincarnations on Candid, a record I've covered previously here. Omar Sosa's 88 well-tuned drums. This sounds exciting. Nat King Cole, live at the Blue Note, Chicago on the Iconic Artist Group, which I looked up. An Iconic Artist Group is a new label founded by some real old industry dudes, but there's not much information on their site. Dave Pike, The Doors Perception, Nature Sounds LP. Pucho and his Latin Soul Brothers. First up, let's talk about these 2 Cannonball Adderley records. If you're like me, even though my mind has slowly been changed over the last year or so, I associate Cannonball Adderley with his great work on Kind of Blue and Miles Davis's Milestones. Just an effervescent powerhouse of a player, a big man. His hits including Mercy, Mercy, Walk Tall, Mercy, Mercy, Mercy by Joe Zawinul and Walk Tall, Black Messiah. And I think of him as just this happy figure. But as recent records have exposed, he was much more than that. And these 2 records really reflect 2 different periods in Cannonball Adderley's career, from 69 and 72, only 4 years apart. But it's a huge leap. It's a real difference. I was really knocked out. Both of these records on Elemental, in collaboration with the Cannonball Adderley Estate and INA France. Both volumes have been mastered for vinyl by Matthew Luthans at the Mastering Lab. Matthew Luthans, his name is popping up a lot. I believe he's worked a lot with Bernie Grundman. He's like one of the younger guys upcoming. But these 2 records, the first one, Burnin' in Bordeaux, live in France, 69, at the Alhambra Theater at the Bordeaux Jazz Festival in France on March 14, 1969. The band includes Cannonball's brother, Nat Adderley, on cornet, Joe Zawinul on electric an acoustic piano, bassist Victor Gaston, and drummer Roy McCurdy. Now, to a degree, you sort of know what to expect from this group. Everyone's playing very well. It's a very tight ensemble, and the whole concert is sort of presented as a sort of a prearranged performance. Adderley introduces each tune and tells a little story about each tune, crediting the writer, the story behind the tunes, and it's a very tight, slick group. And it reminds me, I mean, I'm not that old, I'm pretty old, but when I came up in the 70s and 80s and I was playing in bands before click tracks were popular, it was very important to be tight. Everyone wanted to sound as tight as possible with the other musicians you were playing with. And it's funny, if you go back now and even listen to like a lot of the recordings coming out of New York, the more commercial stuff like CTI or even on Muse, wherever there's overdubbing, you can hear the tempo is not perfect. Now everything's perfect because everybody's playing to a click track, and even if it's not everybody, all the synthesizers and the samples the producer is using are all aligned on the computer in a click track. But back in the old days, there was no click track. There were metronomes. You could create a tape loop perhaps, but even that didn't really begin until in popular music until the early 80s. So there was a focus on groups being very tight. And this group is so tight and seamless, and it's very slick. And you sort of know what to expect. But 4 years later, popping in Paris, live at the Olympia, October 25th, 1972, a part of the Paris Jazz Festival. The group is the same, except we have George Duke on piano and Walter Brooker on bass, and it's really a total change. You can tell this group has absorbed Bitches Brew. They've absorbed the late 60s quintet of Miles Davis. They've absorbed funk music like Sly and the Family Stone. You can hear they're hinting at free jazz, the Black Power movement. And George Duke is the real catalyst on this second record. And this is the same time where he's beginning to play with Frank Zappa on One Size Fits All and Apostrophe and Roxy and Elsewhere. And he is really highlighted on this record. The album opens up with this beautiful acoustic piano playing. He plays amazing electric. He's just brilliant throughout this record. And they give him lots of room. And because they give him lots of room, he's real inspiring everyone else. Roy McCurdy is a drummer who has not been extensively praised or evaluated. His work is sort of hard to find. But on this record, he's so on fire. At times it sounds like Jack DeJohnette from Miles Davis Band. He is absolutely just exploding, as is everyone on the group. Everyone's stretching. The improvisations are hotter than the first record. Let me run through some of the songs. They do Autumn Leaves, but it's absolutely on fire and fast. They do a funkier version of Walk Tall. Then a song which I wasn't familiar with, but apparently is one of Cannonball's standards, Dr. Honoris Causa, that opens up with Duke's brilliant piano playing, a very swinging tune. And then Directions, which made me think of the Miles Davis compilation, but this is the song Directions by Cannonball Adderley, unless I'm confused. But it's straight out of the Miles Lost Quintet mode, with Chick and Dave Holland and Jack DeJohnette. It just simmers and burns, and it's just charged and intense. And there's a great McCurdy solo in that song, and then they go into Mercy, Mercy, Mercy to sort of calm things down, and the closer, the scene. But it's just, this album, the second one in particular, Boppin' in Paris, live at Olympia in 1972, is a revelation. We think we know what we know. We think we know jazz history. Rob Shepard, a friend of mine on Facebook, who's a pretty well-known writer, and I've already said this before, there's this idea that Wynton sort of brought jazz back when it's just a joke. It's a lie. Jazz never went away. Wynton Marsalis was brilliant at getting corporate support, getting CBS to sign them, not to mention what he did at Lincoln Center. But this idea that there was no jazz until Wynton brought it back, that everybody went to Europe, well, that's just, hogwash. There was so much great jazz being recorded in New York on many, many different labels. And those records are hard to find. I made a video about those once. Like such labels as Mainstream, Catalyst, not to mention Black Jazz, Strata East, which weren't in New York, but that feeling is there. Muse, Xanadu, a lot of really funky jazz records, moving forward records. Jazz never went away, and so when you hear a record like this, Boppin' in Paris, you hear yet another, link in the chain of what was really happening in the early 70s in jazz. And because, there were no corporate labels after the 60s, RCA pulled out, Columbia pulled out, jazz musicians were sort of left just to, fight among themselves for the scraps, really. But then when the Young Lions came back, RCA had RCA Novus. Sony brought in Wynton Marsalis and kickstarted that whole thing. There were several labels starting to redo jazz and making it cool again. But anyway, these two records are fantastic records, and I'm really glad they brought them out. Then Shelly, Manne and His Men, Jazz from the Pacific Northwest, also on Corey Weed's Reel to Reel label. It's with Shelly, Manne and His Men. And I'll read the liner notes. The release chronicles 3 live performances by Manne, a hallmark performance at the very first Monterey Jazz Festival in 1958, the second and third performance, 2 stellar evenings at Seattle's The Penthouse Club in 1966. Monty Budwig, Russ Freeman, Herb Geller, Stu Williamson. The 66th performance at the Penthouse features Manne and bassist Monty Budwig alongside Hampton Hawes, Frank Strozier, Connie Candoli, and vocalist Ruth Price, who did one record on Roost. And I was thinking today, Chad Kassem is going to start reissuing the Live at the Black Hawk series of records that Shelly Manne did. And this is a great record. If you don't know Shelly Manne's work, this shows him in all his glory. Yet another supercharged ensemble. And Shelly Manne, I was thinking today, trying to kind of describe the way he played drums and really the way he controlled his groups. He always played inside. He was an inside guy. He was sort of inside the lines. There was nothing free about him. He didn't play over the bar line. He didn't do anything radical. But he was a guy on the inside, but mentally he was always outside. That's why he could play with Ornette Coleman on something else. He could really do anything. And even now, like the work of Tony Williams or Jack DeJohnette, his work is still brilliant. And just like Roy Haynes, you'll just kind of be shocked at what he comes up with. And he does that all over this record. He plays very straight, very tight, and then he'll do something really, just very, very brilliant. Again, the ensemble playing on this record is very well done. The recording quality is fine. Out of all these I've listened to, it's all fine recording quality. I am going to be talking about the Sonny Rollins release. I'm waiting for artwork. And the Sonny Rollins release that's 4 LPs, I believe, but it's exceptional. And it's recorded at the OTRF studios in France, I believe. So it's professionally recorded and you get a big hall sound. But I'll get to that in another video. But all of these sound great. The Monterey recording is okay. The Penthouse recordings, as far as Shelly Manne, are better than the Monterey recordings. But it's just a great snapshot of where he was, and also where West Coast jazz was. And he was a leading, proponent of that or exponent of that, and just seamless, fiery. Everybody is just, dancing on the, edge of a needle. It's really beautiful playing. So I can highly recommend those 3 records: Poppin' in Paris, Live at the Olympia, and Burn in Bordeaux, live in France by Cannonball Adderley. Shelly Manne and His Men, Jazz from the Pacific Northwest, Reel to Reel. Then finally, Brother Jack McDuff, Ain't No Sunshine, live in Seattle. It's interesting, they're unearthing these performances that have never been released before except on bootlegs, but they're bringing out these records now when you can't find the records originally. Like, it's very hard to find a Jack McDuff record now. I mean, you might, out in the wild, perhaps you'd find them. I imagine they're probably on Discogs, but finding them in a store, like if I went to all the stores in New York in the Village, which is about 6 stores, there are no Jack McDuff records in those stores. McDuff, like Jimmy Smith, Charles Kennard, a great organ player. Jack McDuff, a really greasy, gritty, grimy, slimy jazz organist, very powerful, and definitely had his own thing, wasn't afraid to cover pop tunes, and this album is a good example of that. And again, another very tight, intense, churning ensemble. Next up, Sister Rosetta Tharpe, live in France, the 1966 concert in Limoges. Limoges. And this is just Sister Rosetta Tharpe and her guitar. Now, if you don't know her, she is criminally underrated, criminally ignored, as are most, well, there are no female rock and rollers that I can think of, but she definitely influenced Little Richard, Elvis Presley. She was born in 1910 in Arkansas. A gospel performer who moved into rock and roll, which is the same thing you can say about many rock and rollers. Little Richard came out of the church. Almost all the black performers who innovated the early rock and roll, where they all came out of the church. And with just her and her guitar, and she's pretty much playing a hollow body electric, she's incredibly entertaining. She's kind of reworking gospel tunes, great guitar player, funky, incredible presentations, and she just rock and rolled. She boogied really hard. So this performance in France is just her and a guitar, and she's got the audience in the palm of her hand, to the point where by the end they demand 2 encores, and it's just her doing her thing. Now I've seen on the television set her performances with a big band, with a smaller group, definitely a big band. This limited edition 180 gram 2 LP edition includes an extensive insert with rare photographs, 2 sets of liner notes, and statements by Susan Tedeschi, Shemeka Copeland, Henry Rollins, and Billy Gibbons. This is on Zev Feldman's Deep Digs label. Zev also has the Jazz Detective label. This was restored and mastered by multi-Grammy award-winning engineer Michael Graves, with lacquers cut by Bernie Grumman at Bernie Grumman Mastering Studios. So all these records have a high pedigree as far as their conversion. This obviously has some digital fixes. And I just listened to all the tracks on here, and she's just so joyous. If you don't know Sister Rosetta Tharpe, just dial her up on YouTube. I mean, there's no one like her before or after. She's a force of nature, and she's just great fun and very uplifting in the way that gospel music was. I mean, when I came up, I was born a Catholic, then we moved south and started going to Baptist churches, and it was kind of a folky music thing. But on the way to church on Sundays, we would pass the AME Zion Church, and they were rocking in there, man. And she brings that spirit to all her performances. Even though there's also something very subtle about Sister Rosetta Tharpe. Probably because she's sincere in her praise. And it's just really dynamic stuff. So going forward, I probably got about 10 more records to talk about, which I'm still listening to. So I appreciate your watching. If you like what I'm doing, please like and subscribe. Thanks a lot. Bye.